The Strait of Hormuz was open before this unjustified war. We're now scrambling to try to find a way to get it back opened again. Not only is it causing economic havoc to our country and to residents all around this nation, families trying to make ends meet, but you see on top of that, the Iranians finding ways to leverage that, as we allowed them to do with the Chinese for tens of billions of dollars. And so my point is, before we even get to a nuclear negotiation, this regime is getting money to rebuild, purchase more drones, cause more havoc. And this is before we're even trying to get back to.
But I apologize. I don't understand how they're getting this.
The battle over America's Iran policy exploded into public view during a tense Senate hearing, as Senator Cory Booker confronted Secretary Marco Rubio with a series of questions that quickly turned into a heated political showdown. From the very beginning, Booker made it clear that he wasn't interested in hearing talking points. He wanted answers. Specifically, he wanted to know whether the administration's military actions and subsequent negotiations had actually improved America's position or created a crisis that now requires even more concessions to resolve. As the questioning began, Booker focused on the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical shipping routes. For months, global markets have been watching developments there closely because any disruption to traffic through the strait can have enormous consequences for oil prices and international trade. Booker argued that before the conflict escalated, the strait remained open. Now, according to him, the United States finds itself negotiating to restore conditions that already existed before military action was taken. That, he suggested, is not a sign of success. It's evidence of a strategy that backfired. The senator then turned his attention to sanctions relief. Booker repeatedly pressed Rubio about what Iran might receive in exchange for making concessions related to its nuclear program. Would sanctions be lifted? Would frozen assets become available? Could billions of dollars potentially flow back into the Iranian economy? Rubio attempted to clarify the administration's position, explaining that sanctions relief would not simply be handed over without significant concessions from Tehran. But Booker wasn't satisfied. He pointed to reports suggesting that Iran had already benefited from oil sales and sanctions adjustments worth potentially tens of billions of dollars. The senator warned that any additional financial relief could ultimately help the Iranian government rebuild military capabilities, fund regional proxy groups, and strengthen its influence throughout the Middle East. As Booker continued speaking, the hearing room grew noticeably more tense. His argument wasn't merely about dollars and cents. It was about leverage. And according to Booker, America had already surrendered too much of it. He accused the administration of creating a situation where Iran now possesses greater bargaining power than it did before the conflict began. Booker argued that by allowing the crisis to escalate, Washington had given Tehran an opportunity to exploit disruptions in global commerce and energy markets. The result, he said, was an adversary capable of demanding more while America struggles to achieve its objectives. Then came one of the most dramatic moments of the hearing. Booker compared the current negotiations to agreements pursued during the administration of Barack Obama. The senator pointed out what he viewed as a glaring contradiction. For years, many critics condemned Obama's approach to Iran as weak and dangerous. Now, Booker argued, those same critics appear willing to embrace similar concessions under a different administration. That accusation landed like a thunderbolt. The room fell silent. Rubio immediately prepared to respond. And what happened next transformed a policy discussion into one of the most intense confrontations of the hearing.
The Strait of Hormuz, I was listening to their conversations you had with some of my colleagues. We've now seen the strait close for months, and you explained that we're going to see an opening of the strait, and ultimately the exchange we will get for that is after that fact we will release certain sanctions. Is that correct?
No, that's not what I said. What I said was that if they open the straits, we will lift our blockade. The straits and the blockade are what are interrelated.
And so for the nuclear program, in exchange for getting rid of the fissile material out of country, I imagine, is what the highly enriched uranium, we would release sanctions. Is that correct?
Well, it's not just that. It's also their enrichment activity. They would have to, they would have to make very severe and significant concessions on what they intend to enrich in the future.
And already with the March relaxing of sanctions, allowing Iranians to sell oil to the Chinese, estimates have been between $10 and $50 billion they got from that relaxing of sanctions. How much money might we see in a deal in our relaxings of sanctions in order to get rid of the highly enriched uranium and stop their enrichment?
Well, let me just tell you on that portion, the sanctions that were released on Iran were boats on the water. And so that oil was already out in the marketplace. It was sold at market rates, but the sanctions covered, and to the extent we've been able to enforce them, we have the revenues of those sales. So yeah, the Iranian oil was unsanctioned so that it could be sold, but the revenue would have to flow back to blocked accounts, which our sanctions were able to go after. We've also seized, I believe, 6 vessels in the Indo-Pacific that involved Iranian sanctioned oil on top of it. So that wasn't necessarily a trade. They didn't get $50 billion directly as a result of, they might have gotten some of it, they certainly didn't get the majority of it. They are now losing hundreds of millions of dollars a day in revenue because of the blockade. And the blockade exists because of what they're doing in the Straits.
Right, and I guess the conclusion I have, and my time's expired, is that the Strait of Hormuz was open before this unjustified war. We're now scrambling to try to find a way to get it back opened again. Not only is it causing economic havoc to our country and to residents all around this nation, families trying to make ends meet, but you see on top of that, the Iranians finding ways to leverage that, as we allowed them to do with the Chinese for tens of billions of dollars. And so my point is, before we even get to a nuclear negotiation, this regime is getting money to rebuild, purchase more drones, cause more havoc. And this is before we're even trying to get back to a
But I apologize, I don't understand how they're getting this. What revenue are you referring to?
Well, there's 2 sources of revenue we're seeing. One is the revenue from the Chinese, that's factually documented. And number 2, the revenue that you're proposing that they should receive by releasing all of their highly enriched uranium, as well as in making a commitment about their enrichment capacities.
Okay, yeah.
Hold on. And that was the exact deal that you guys vilified, that the president and you vilified President Obama from having.
Yeah. No,
So
I don't
here we
think those
have
are
a
not the
worse situation where
Those are not the same
our
deals.
adversary and our enemy, who's causing havoc in the region, who is funding proxies and terrorists, has discovered, thanks to you all, the power of shutting down the Strait of Hormuz.
No, they didn't
which
discover.
is
They
all-
knew that a long time ago, and they've done it before.
Clearly, we all knew that a long time ago. That's why this
And they intended to do this at
ill-conceived
some point
war
in the
should have
future
never
as well.
happened.
Yeah, but-
you have
but-
made our adversary in a stronger negotiating position. We are the strongest nation on the planet Earth, and we're in a stalemate with Iran. And now we're begging to get back into a deal that you all
We're not
trashed
begging.
in the first place.
There's no one begging. I don't
Clearly,
know.
this is a
Senator
shame.
Senator Booker, your time's up.
But
Senator
can I just-
Rubio, since he's
I do
gone
want to
over, you
address
can
some of these points
respond.
because they go to the heart of the matter. No one's begging for anything here. The Iranians might be begging because their economy's losing hundreds of millions of dollars a day. That they are losing. Understand, Iran had street protests going on before all of this started. All of those factors, economic factors in Iran, are far worse today than they were 6 months ago when those protests were happening. They have hyperinflation. Their currency's completely devalued. They're struggling to make payroll for their government workers. Iran is in a very serious situation. And if it was up to the political class there, and I understand everybody there is sort of radical in some way, but if it was up to the people that actually like go to elections and wear the suits and you see on TV, they'd probably make a deal tomorrow. It's the issue they're facing is that the supreme leader and the IRGC Corps are a little bit more immune from those pressures until they can be convinced otherwise. And I think that's the direction that they're moving in, because the reality, I don't know where you're getting this perception that Iran is stronger. Iran has no navy left. They've lost a substantial percentage of their defense industrial base. That Iran has lost a substantial percentage of their missile launchers. And their economy is far worse today, and I mean far worse today, than it was 6 to 9 months ago. And they are looking at hundreds of billions of dollars of reconstruction costs just to get to where they were 6 months
Mr. Rubio, you keep telling us how we're winning this war. The president keeps saying,
Well, the war's over
completely
now.
annihilated. The war is not over. And yet the American people see how we're losing at the pump and with their costs, and yet this thing still hasn't been resolved. Every day he tweets out, oh, we've obliterated them, we've annihilated them, they're going to surrender. But yet we still find ourselves spending billions of dollars a week
Senator
on
Booker,
a war abroad.
you've gone way over, and
It would be nice if we had hearings where people
Thank
had to
you,
be held
Senator
accountable.
Booker. Senator Scott.
All right. Marco Rubio wasn't about to let Booker's criticism go unanswered. As soon as he was given an opportunity to respond, the secretary pushed back forcefully against the senator's entire premise. Rubio argued that Booker was ignoring the reality on the ground. In his view, Iran is not negotiating from a position of strength. It's negotiating because it's under immense pressure. The secretary began outlining what he described as a devastating series of setbacks for Tehran. According to Rubio, Iran's economy has been battered by sanctions, military losses, and internal instability. Inflation remains severe. The national currency has lost substantial value. Government finances are under strain, and public dissatisfaction continues to simmer beneath the surface. Rubio reminded lawmakers that protests had already been occurring within Iran before the latest conflict intensified. Those economic pressures, he argued, have only become worse. Far worse. He described a country struggling to manage basic financial obligations while simultaneously facing the enormous costs associated with repairing damaged infrastructure and rebuilding military assets. The secretary appeared increasingly frustrated as Booker continued suggesting that Iran had somehow gained leverage. At one point, Rubio directly challenged the claim. Where exactly is this strength coming from? How can anyone look at Iran's economic condition and conclude that the regime is winning? Rubio then shifted to military considerations. According to his assessment, Iran has suffered significant damage to critical capabilities. Military infrastructure has been degraded. Defense industries have been disrupted. Missile launching capacity has reportedly been reduced. And the government now faces the daunting prospect of spending enormous sums just to restore what has already been lost. To Rubio, these are not indicators of a stronger adversary. They're signs of a government under extraordinary pressure. But the secretary didn't stop there. He argued that many observers are overlooking the broader strategic picture. The administration's objective, Rubio explained, is not merely to achieve a temporary agreement. It's to force meaningful changes in Iranian behavior while maintaining pressure on the regime. And from his perspective, the economic blockade has been accomplishing exactly that. Every day, he said, Iran loses substantial revenue. Every day, the cost of maintaining its current position grows higher. Eventually, Rubio argued, those pressures will become impossible for Tehran to ignore. The secretary's message was clear. This isn't a failing strategy. It's a strategy that requires patience. But Booker remained unconvinced, and his next response would shift the conversation from military effectiveness to something far more personal for millions of Americans: their wallets. Before we get into that next explosive exchange, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. We cover the biggest political confrontations, Senate hearings, and breaking developments from Washington, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. As the hearing entered its final and most contentious phase, Cory Booker moved away from discussions about military assets and sanctions. Instead, he focused on something every American understands: the cost of living. Booker argued that while administration officials continue describing the conflict as a success, ordinary citizens are experiencing a very different reality. They're paying more, they're facing uncertainty, and they're watching a conflict that was supposedly resolved continue to dominate headlines. The senator questioned how Americans are supposed to reconcile these competing narratives. On one hand, officials repeatedly describe Iran as weakened and isolated. On the other hand, negotiations continue, military expenditures continue, and economic consequences continue. To Booker, those facts simply don't add up. He challenged Rubio directly. If the war is over, why are negotiations still ongoing? If victory has been achieved, why does Washington remain deeply engaged in efforts to secure additional agreements? And if America truly holds all the leverage, why does it appear to be searching for compromises? Those questions struck at the heart of the administration's messaging. For months, supporters have argued that pressure on Iran has delivered results. Critics, however, claim that the conflict has become more expensive than anticipated and has failed to produce a decisive resolution. Booker positioned himself firmly in that second camp. He warned that every additional day of uncertainty creates new economic consequences for families already struggling with rising costs. Energy prices remain a concern. Global markets remain nervous, and taxpayers continue funding military operations and diplomatic initiatives. At one point, Booker suggested that the administration keeps moving the goalposts. First, Americans were told military action would achieve specific objectives. Then they were told negotiations would secure lasting results. Now, according to Booker, the public is being asked to believe that continued spending and prolonged talks are themselves signs of success. Rubio strongly disagreed. He maintained that Iran's economic condition demonstrates the effectiveness of the strategy. But by this point, neither side appeared interested in persuading the other. The hearing had evolved into a broader political battle over competing visions of American foreign policy. One vision argues that maximum pressure ultimately forces adversaries to make concessions. The other warns that military escalation often creates new complications while failing to resolve existing ones. As tensions escalated, the committee chairman finally intervened. Booker's time had expired. Yet, even as the gavel came down and the hearing moved forward, the disagreement remained unresolved. And perhaps that's the most revealing part of the entire exchange. Because the clash between Booker and Rubio wasn't just about Iran. It was about a much larger question facing Washington today. How should America use its power abroad? When is military pressure effective? When does it become counterproductive? And perhaps most importantly, how long are Americans willing to bear the economic and political costs of conflicts that show no clear end in sight? Those questions remain unanswered. But after this explosive hearing, one thing is certain. The debate is far from over. What do you think? Did Booker expose serious flaws in the administration strategy, or did Rubio make a convincing case that Iran is actually weaker than ever? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so you never miss our latest political analysis and breaking news coverage.